Hi, I'm Woo-Young Chung. I'm the producer for Track B. I'm delighted that you decide to join us for this session. See, business outcome. You always say we should focus on business outcome. However, it's easier said than done. Today, in this session, our two distinguished speakers will be discussing and sharing their view on driving business outcome with the data transformation. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Amy.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here this morning, and sorry to not be able to meet all of you in person, but really excited to be here as well with my friend Ken Priyadarshi, who has been my partner on data-driven transformation now at a number of different organizations. So I am Amy Gershkoff Bolles. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Tradesy, and I've been a Chief Data Officer in 3 previous roles and worked in data science and analytics in my career for more than 15 years. And I'm really excited to be here today and share with you all some of the lessons that I've learned about data-driven transformation over the course of those journeys. And really excited to be here with Ken. Ken, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Ken Pradarshi out of San Francisco. I am the Global Technology Platform Lead at EY. I've worked with Amy on many projects, many occasions. It's great to engage with you all.
So one of the things that Ken and I have been talking about is how excited we are to talk about data-driven transformation, because it's something that I know is top of mind for so many organizations, and yet is an area that so many organizations really struggle in. And so if we look at the next slide, I know that this is definitely an area where there are quite a few challenges. Ken probably knows this better than anyone, since he has been my partner on this journey now at several different organizations, as well as had clients at a multitude of other different industries. So Ken, do you want to talk about some of the challenges that you've seen over the course of your career within all across different industries that are trying to implement new data strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Amy. So statistics aside, and there are many different studies out there in general with different numbers on what I like to call failed transformations, because I think it's always more interesting if you're a data geek to learn from failures than not. I'll say this: there's no shortage of case studies on mammoth failures when it comes to business transformations. And regardless of what the statistics and the numbers say, it's very much not a secret that the majority of transformations fail. The majority of large data-driven transformations increasingly also fail. And I think that there are probably 3 or so, if not, well, probably many salient features to the challenges associated with this. One is that the era of easy optimizations, gee, I'm just going to go kill this process or tweak this process. All of those easy optimizations are already done. And so this last mile of optimizations now is perhaps harder than ever. And increasingly in the world of digital, you're no longer, as a Fortune 100 company or even a startup, anymore an island to yourself. You're very much connected to so many other different ecosystem players that includes channels, partnerships, co-development models, etc. So it's not just that you have to succeed on your own when you're doing a transformation. You have to succeed in partnership with your ecosystem partners. And then last but not least, IT budgets seem to be a key, they seem to become bigger every year. And I think a lot of that is that as we move towards these business and digital transformations, there's an extraordinary amount of exponential amount of growing complexity to the back office. And it's no longer about just integrating systems, but managing the integration of the teams, the knowledge management, and the data assets across the entire enterprise. So I would say that we're increasingly, I think, now in this era where you're going to see this emergence of, or this merging of the COO role, the Chief Transformation Officer role, Chief Operating Officer role, with the Chief Data Officer role, right? And my friend Amy is actually a great example of that, right? So the idea of doing a transformation now without data is almost laughable, I think, these days in industry. Back to you, Amy.
Well, one of the things that Ken touched on. So Ken and I first met at eBay, and Ken was my partner on the transformation journey that we were on there. And one of the things that we were sort of reminiscing about this morning is the fact that data-driven transformation and transformation at scale is really these days as much about the people and processes internally and stakeholder management and finding the right way to sort of sell other leaders in these very matrixed organizations on the benefits of transformation. It's as much about all of that as it is about the technology. And so, we spent a lot of time, obviously, on technology and on infrastructure and looking at ways to create scalable back-end systems that enabled mass personalization at scale in product and in marketing, and set up systems that enabled data science to drive and optimize much better customer experiences across the board. But we actually spend equally as much time, geeking out about the back-end infrastructure as we did thinking about talent strategy and thinking about how to work with stakeholders in a matrix organization to drive the kind of alignment that you need in order to have real transformation at scale. And so I think, Ken's points about the sort of holistic aspects of transformation really ring true based on the experiences that we had together. So we thought we thought it would be a little bit fun if we kind of kept this conversational and did this a bit like a fireside chat, with Ken and I asking each other questions, some from this slide, and with you all asking us questions as well. I believe there's the opportunity for you to put questions into the chat function in the app, and so definitely encourage you all to do that. I know there's a lot of fantastic chief data officers and data leaders from across the world that are participating, and we'd love your thoughts and questions and comments as well. But for the moment, we'll sort of kick off by starting with really a question that's a very nice segue from the discussion we've been having, which is Ken, would love to get your thoughts around what do you think are some of the best ways to ensure that you're really aligning the data strategy with the business strategy in a more holistic sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it obviously starts from the top into making sure that we have C-suite alignment to a data-driven transformation strategy. I think a big part of what we have to look at as we're doing transformations is almost play the part of data therapist to the C-suite sometimes and say, hey, are we really just capturing data to do what you as the C-suite always just wanted to do? Or is there a mindset where as we are embarking upon this transformation, there's an opportunity to learn from the field, harvest data from the field, and then reinform the top-down C-suite strategy that was going to sort of inform the transformation to begin with. So, I think the easy thing obviously is to say, gee, we need a C-suite sponsor for the transformation in each business unit, each operating unit. But I think the missing piece is, gee, is there a feedback loop in the field where we can run experiments, learn from data that's already out there, and then help challenge the cognitive biases that exist in the C-suite. An interesting war story I have around this is for a company that was very much a company that grew organically and had a lot of localized cultures and localized business units that ran their own subdivisions in their own unique sort of way. And so they all had these interesting different data silos around what the behavior of a customer might be in one country or one region versus another. And the chief data, the C-suite was very much, gee, we've got to centralize all our data, and once we do that, we'll obviously find the transformational efficiencies we want to do so. And the interesting, I think, story we learned there, based sort of my engagement on that particular project, was you don't actually have to take a one-size-fits-all approach to solving a transformation problem. Increasingly today, there are data technologies that let us federate the data and have more distributed computational strategies on learning from the data. And so it's okay, actually, to have different data silos that can be virtualized and connected that still provide a unifying C-suite opinion of what's happening of the field. And yet also allow localization of systems and data systems. And so that was a great example of where the data strategy was molded in conjunction with technology to the operating model and culture of that particular organization. And so, what I often say is the key to aligning data strategy and business strategy is not just a simple top-down mandate to say, hey, we've got C-suite direction on what we want to do, but it's also learning from the field and then perhaps mirroring the operating model and business culture of an organization. And we increasingly have data technologies such as federated data integration, distributed computing now, that allow us to not have to do the plumbing of moving all the data together, but still learning in a virtualized way of the various individual BU data silos that might exist out there. So it's a great time in general to align data strategy and business strategy.
And I think too, one of the things that Ken is touching on that I think is so important is, there's an opportunity now to not only sort of de-silo data and be able to draw insights from across the data ecosystem, but also just from an organizational standpoint. I know a lot of organizations are really sort of struggling with how to think about data organizationally. So they might hire a chief data officer and talk about centralizing all data science and all analytics and all engineering under one organization. But then other organizations have realized that then by centralizing, it has a lot of benefits, right? Because you have great oversight of the work, you have excellent career growth and mentorship for all this technical talent. But they also start to lose some of the closeness with the business, what the business goals are and the business objectives. And you really want to be, if you're to get the most value out of your data scientists or business analysts, frankly, data engineers, you want them sort of eat, sleeping, and breathing what the goals and objectives are of the business units that they're supporting. So if they're meant to be working hand in glove with marketing or with product or with operations, you want them deeply ingrained in what that business unit needs. And so what I think a lot of organizations are finding is that a hybrid sort of matrix approach is really kind of the best of both worlds in terms of getting the most value out of your technical talent, because on the one hand, you're getting the advantages of centralization from the standpoint of all of that career growth and mentorship and career pathing and so forth. But at the same time, you're keeping people close to the business units that they're supporting. And so I've even worked in roles as a chief data officer where members of my team, back in the days when we were all in the office, members of my team often sat a couple of days a week with the data team and a couple of days a week with the business unit that they were supporting, did different kind of working sessions each week with both teams and really felt sort of a kinship with both of the organizations, both the data organization and their business partners, as a way to sort of maintain that closeness. But the sort of fully centralized data teams that are isolated from the business units are not having as much impact. So I like to liken this to, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there were a lot of companies with an internet department. I don't know how many people who are listening remember those days, but I do. Folks had an internet department. Of course, now that sounds really silly, right? Because everybody in every department uses the internet. And I think one of the really interesting things we're going to see over the course of the next many years is whether organizations continue to have any sort of either hybrid or fully centralized data organization, or whether data is going to become like the internet department in terms of how everybody does their jobs in product, in marketing, in operations across an organization strategically, that data is going to become so ingrained in how we do our work that 20 years from now, someone will be speaking at some conference talking about the days when there was a data department, and people will sort of chuckle about that sort of antiquated idea. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens. I look forward to returning with all of you and Ken here as well in 20 years to see if that pans out. We did have a question from one of the participants. Thank you so much. Asking about KPIs and how we think about what are the right KPIs for measuring success. So Ken, would love your thoughts based on your experience of how to think about selecting the right KPIs for measuring success.
Absolutely. I think that one of the mechanisms we've used in the past for what the right KPI is actually looking per business unit as to what is most important as a near-term outcome as well as a long-term outcome. So one of the things we try to do is we try to actually create a cartoon diagram of the entire enterprise: sales and marketing, operations, procurement, finance, IT, etc. You put that all in a nice little cartoon whiteboard. And then we actually work with C-suite to find one or two of the most strategic KPIs per department. And what we learn is there's different degrees of sort of complexity and depth in each department on what is important from a KPI perspective. So let's take operations as an example. I recently worked with an organization where the most important thing in the IT department was procurement velocity. They simply could not acquire the digital assets from a third party fast enough. It was taking them up to 90 days to acquire new technology to enable in the field. So for that particular operating unit, procurement velocity was the most important thing. Look at a finance group, it might be something like, gee, how much time does it take for us to close the books? We want to have more agility over there. You talk to the sales and marketing team, it could be something, gee, how many deals, what's our conversion rate per deal or pursuit that we go after. So it's not so much one KPI in a transformation as much as actually creating what I like to call almost like a panel. If you go for a blood test, what's the blood test for your organization? And what we like to do is, I think, recommend a series of panels, a panel with a series of KPIs, because very often the most interesting aha is the interconnectivity of these KPIs. How is one thing connected to another? Gee, our financial KPIs might be impacting our procurement KPIs, which might be impacting how quickly we can go to market with something. And so being able to find those ahas is, I think, truly remarkable. The one overarching KPI, regardless of the unit or the individual KPI that we're going after, that I like to measure, is also, very much analogous to an A/B test, except it's for the business unit or the operating unit to say, gee, if we did a treatment or a particular intervention, once we've identified that particular KPI, were we able to do a before and after? Were we able to do a control group versus a test group? And having that mindset makes it a lot easier. There's no shortage of reports and KPIs in large organizations. It's more about actually focusing on one or two per major operating and business unit, and then having this sort of control versus test or A/B test mindset. I think when it comes to KPIs, that helps.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that Ken touched on that really resonates for me is how important it is to really focus on a particular KPI and not have sort of every unit within the business focused. I mean, they of course can have their own goals, but they ultimately need to lather up to a goal that is like one overarching goal for the entire organization. Because otherwise you can have a situation where, one team is trying to drive more traffic to the site and another team is trying to drive up conversion. But those metrics usually move in opposite directions. When you drive up a lot of traffic, it's going to suppress conversion, usually, at least initially. And so otherwise you can have metrics that are at cross purposes with one another. One of the organizations that I think actually, the organization that I think is really the North Star in terms of being so excellent at thinking about what the one KPI should be, in my experience, was the Obama for America campaign. So I worked on the Obama 2012 campaign, reporting to the campaign manager, Jim Messina. And one of the things that he did at the very beginning of the campaign that I thought was so smart is he told me that, in 2008, when President Obama was running for election for his first term, of course he won, but there was a lot of challenges because every department within the campaign was focused on a different goal. So one team was focused on how many doors they were knocking on. Another was focused on how many volunteers they were recruiting. And another was focused on how many donations were coming in, or, how many ad impressions they were getting, et cetera. So every department within the campaign, which is really like a large, really in terms of size, like a large Fortune 500 company, but different in many ways, of course. But he said that posed a lot of challenges. So in 2012, when President Obama ran for re-election, we oriented the entire campaign around one KPI, and that was the KPI that every single person in the campaign used to make decisions in their part of the organization every day. And that KPI was, if the election were held today, would President Obama win or lose? Period. That was the whole KPI. And if you think about it, that's kind of the most important question for the campaign. And so what we did was reorient every department within the campaign. I was overseeing a large chunk of campaign operations. We reoriented every department within the campaign to be organized around that goal. And so that might mean on any given day you have more or fewer ad impressions or more or fewer doors knocked, but it didn't matter as long as what you were doing was driving towards that goal. And so I've taken that real negative insight from my time working in politics and really leveraged that in every organization I've been in since, in chief data officer roles, and now in my role as chief operating officer as well, which is to really think, of course, most companies say, how should this work in the corporate context? And most companies actually think they have good alignment around metrics. But then if you start to poke, even within the world of financial metrics, are you more focused on revenue growth, or are you more focused on EBITDA profile? Are you more focused on total revenue, or getting more first-time customers? Growing your actual customer base, or growing revenue from within existing customers? These are all very different goals. And so there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer. But making sure that if you ask key leaders within the organization, that everyone gives the same answer, that is what we have found will drive the best results. And so whatever financial metrics you might pick, or total number of customers, or some companies have even used metrics around engagement with their product, figuring that engagement is, of course, a leading indicator of your likelihood to actually engage in giving the company revenue. So the metric you pick almost doesn't matter, so long as it lines up with your strategy, and so long as there's clear alignment across the organization, and maintaining that alignment in a consistent way over multiple quarters, so that you can actually make meaningful progress against moving it, I've found to be the biggest strategic unlock in the organizations I've been a part of. And driving alignment around a single KPI, I have found, is not easy. In most organizations, especially large ones, there's lots of different usually strong viewpoints from leaders about what those KPIs should be. But if you can get to that level of organizational alignment, it really unlocks a lot of business value in my experience. So one question we had on this topic, actually from a member of the audience. Thank you all so much for all these great questions coming in. Ken and I will try to get to as many of them as we can. One question was around the KPIs that we should think about, or how we should think about KPIs around data or enterprise transformation itself. So not the business KPI you're trying to drive, revenue or EBITDA or product engagement or whatever the case may be, but how to actually measure transformation in a meaningful way. Ken, would love your thoughts as someone who I know has been the person to implement those metrics and milestones in a number of organizations. How do you think about that question?
Yeah. I think going back to sort of this, what's the most important one KPI that matters to an internal enterprise transformation? That mindset is something that I've learned from Amy in particularly, and I feel like every Fortune 100 company can learn from campaigns. If I were to take that and answer the question that just came in, I'm actually working right now on a bunch of projects, and in one in particular, we've said that the most important thing for this particular organization is an adoption KPI. So we've built this this incredible, massive enterprise system. What's the point if the adoption of that system is low? If everybody in this massive Fortune 100 organization is not touching that system every day, and so it's an adoption KPI, then perhaps we haven't really changed all the business processes that relate to it. And so again, the one KPI we care most about in the context of this one Fortune 100 organization is really just something as simple of number of user logins today, right? That's what we measure because that system was essentially a multi-year transformation around processes, business processes, operational processes, sales and marketing processes, financial processes. So we expect it to become part of the daily fabric, part of the day job of everybody in that organization. And so we've got, obviously a panel of reports and all those things, but the one key KPI for us for this interesting enterprise organization is how many users logged into my internal enterprise system today. Of course, you've got ancillary and supporting KPIs around that. You can almost visualize it as a root tree diagram or a fishbone diagram or a tree diagram. But something as simple as that is something that helps us. Some of the other KPIs for other examples that are not internally related, again, comes to what is sort of the key outcome for the operating unit for the particular year. And this goes back to the idea of, gee, is it if you're an electronics company, how is this then connecting to sort of your number of units you've shipped or number of units you've sold? If you're more a services company, you may have, gee, how much efficiency did we achieve in our logistics supply chain, et cetera. And those are great, but I think being able to simply tie the hygiene of using this mothership of a system every day to all these external outcomes, that ruthless sort of mindset helps us all, at least in this particular case study.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've gotten a few questions in the chat about sort of this theme around measuring the success of data transformation. And I think one of the themes that really came through in what Ken said that resonated for me is about sort of tying that success to ultimately business outcome success, the outcome of the business unit that you're trying to drive. Because at the end of the day, data transformation for data transformation's sake is just intellectually interesting and expensive, right? It's meant to actually move the needle on important business outcomes. whether that's moving the needle in terms of growing top line or creating a better EBITDA profile or something like that, or whether it's about reduction of risk to the business. In the case of data transformation that's designed to protect privacy or enhance security. All of those are still ways of measuring a business outcome rather than just a pure outcome from the data transformation aspect of it. And so I always push my teams really hard to think about if this is successful, whether it's a data migration or infrastructure change or some sort of systems upgrade or optimization. I always encourage them, how would you explain to a non-technical CEO why this matters to him or her? And if you can't explain that, then it's worth questioning the project in the first place. But usually there is a non-technical explanation, such as this migration will improve the productivity of the engineering team by 20%. All right, that's a great way to explain it, not in technical terms, but that show a clear business value for what you're doing. So I think thinking in those terms can often be really helpful. We got one great question that came in here around if you know that you want to grow your company, you're trying to catalyze growth. You have a pretty clear idea of how to do that, and data is a part of the story. Where do you start? How do you think about where to start on the journey of data transformation? We've talked a lot about how to get there once you sort of know where you're going, and how to measure success along the way. But when you have a blank sheet of paper, how do you know where to start? And Ken would love your thoughts on how to get started on this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I've got a nice story on this. So I was, again, working for an electronics giant, and this was very much a company that was obsessed with growth. It's a huge company, and they felt that that they wanted to capture sort of the double-digit growth of many years ago as they were maturing into their cycle as a giant, global giant. And this was very much a B2B sales company. And they had as much the same problems, perhaps, as a startup might, because they didn't know how to get more customer telemetry or actually granular customer data, because it was all coming in through alliance channels or through bundlers. So they couldn't actually go and touch the end customer that was buying their nugget. They relied on these middle tier companies and wholesalers that bundled everything and then sold their product, right? So in this case, they needed to adopt almost an e-commerce like mindset to say, gee, let's create a customer DNA profile for us on who is actually buying our widgets or our technologies. And we need to first and foremost create a telemetry strategy on how we're going to even understand our customer, capture the data, and then come up with the relevant sales treatments or growth campaigns to go capture that. In this particular case, they created incentives for their channel partners to start instrumenting that data and reporting that data back to the actual electronics giant, so that they could then better tailor their products and their sales and marketing campaigns, and creating the right incentives to make that happen. So sometimes it's as simple as, gee, let's come up with a framework on what are the pieces of data that we need. And as with any product, you want to probably have a customer DNA that looks at the demographics of your buyer, the behavior of your buyer, then perhaps even the psychographics of your buyer, right? All alien concepts to perhaps a company that's just used to this blob of, gee, we've got to sell through our channels, and they'll figure out who to go sell it to, right? So having that sort of granular customer DNA, working with channel partners or any channels around telemetry that helps you then inform and create a customer DNA is perhaps the path forward. If you don't get that, you're going to be hard pressed to then create the product bundling or channel incentive strategies to be able to do so. So, I think something that we're seeing very interesting around growth campaigns, whether you're a startup or a large giant, is the need to create or adopt this customer analytics mindset around creating a customer DNA and then being able to create the right bundles and campaigns to be able to achieve that. And then, step zero often is, gee, I don't even have the telemetry. I better go and instrument the telemetry to go and capture that data so I can create those treatments accordingly.
Yeah, that certainly resonates, Ken, with my own experience, which is that, you've got to start with that sort of unpacking and unraveling that customer journey in a really granular way to understand from a very, kind of metrics and data-driven standpoint, what's happening at each stage of the funnel. And like Ken said, that's true whether you're a large Fortune 100 company or a tiny startup. You want to understand sort of how are people becoming aware of you and discovering you and coming to your site or your app or starting to engage with your product. And then what's happening at each stage of the funnel? Where are people finding friction? What's the biggest point of drop off? And usually that points you to where the biggest area of leverage is in terms of where to sort of think about kicking off a very data-driven growth strategy. And so, for example, if you have a ton of people visiting your site, but most people are just going to your homepage and leaving, then your biggest opportunity is how to get them to more deeply engage with the rest of your site or the rest of your app. Whereas if folks are getting all the way to checkout for whatever the product is and then abandoning their cart, then that points to a very different area that you might want to focus on from a growth perspective. But data can be useful sort of all along that journey, right? In terms of thinking about ways to diagnose where those areas of greatest leverage are, and then helping to, once you've identified your first target of area of greatest leverage, unpacking, what the best ways are to approach driving growth in that area. So shifting gears slightly, I know one of the things that Ken and I think I had mentioned too early on was about talent strategy and about how you think about and how important talent strategy is to successful transformation. And so, one of the questions, Ken, I'd love for you to go deeper on is how to think not only about sort of talent strategy broadly, but then also how you think about talent alignment within the organization, incentive structures to deliver the best results, and aligning the mechanisms for success for that great talented group of people that you want to hire. So would love some of your thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start by, again, talking about failures and where I think people often go wrong. And a lot of people think that, gee, if we're going to create a data office, if I just cram it full of data scientists and data engineers, my problems are solved and I've accomplished a data-driven transformation. And I think this is where, I've learned now through multiple transformations that it's actually really the quality of your team that trumps necessarily even your operating model, how you structure it, where you got the folks from, etc. And I often say that it's about having this mindset where you're obsessed with acquiring unicorns. And there are different people use different colloquialisms. They say, "Oh, I want a data ninja." No, I want a data unicorn. No, I want a whatever the data hacker, whatever the term of your organization might be. That's stylish these days. But whatever it may be, the most important thing that we've learned is that a small startup, 5 people in a room with pizza mindset is sometimes far more influential in influencing change in an organization than a large army of people. And this is something that large Fortune 100 companies are particularly victim to, or fall victim to. They think it's very much a, gee, I need a large headcount to go and do a transformation, mindset. We've got to move away from that and actually have a series of what I would call distributed pods, 4 to 5 people each, that can then be close to the business in each group. And I remember early days with Amy when we were doing this at one of our early organizations. I had a really simple mindset that I used to checklist that I used to use when we were creating these little self-contained pods. And I said, gee, does the pod that we've created, let's say for marketing, have a hacker, hustler, scientist? So those 3 roles were the cheat sheet. Do you have a hacker? And that was just a colloquialism we used for, do you have a data engineer who can go and pull data from multiple different systems? Because if you don't even start with that, you're dead on arrival. Then do you have a hustler, which was basically a way of saying data storyteller. So you could talk to the business and actually extrapolate from very often abstract needs, a story that could be that you were moving towards. And then finally, you have the scientist, the data scientist who created those sophisticated statistical models based on the data that came in from the data engineer, but then always tying to the end story that the data storyteller was talking about, right? So it was a very simple mindset, which was basically for every pod that we create at this company, whether it's in marketing or finance or whatever, I want to see for each pod just 3 people: who's the hacker, who's the hustler, who's the scientist. And you may go and create your own models and your own stories around such talent pods and modules, but it very much ends up then weaving itself into the culture of the BU or the operating unit that this pod might exist in. Something that's really interesting these days is, in addition to those 3 roles on a day-to-day basis, particularly now with the digital transformation era, perhaps triggered by the pandemic, increasingly people say, gee, I also want an app designer. And so I want to be able to create a data product for each of these pods that then tie into a broader system that transforms the organization, right? So I think the agility of the pod works well when it's a small team and it's distributed, and yet can then, in a hybrid, centralized way, coordinate with each other. And so you've got perhaps this family of change ambassador pods that now exist in different parts of the organization. I'll end by saying, gee, where do we go and acquire all this unicorn talent from? And I think that it's a very hands-on experience. I like to think that I spend quite a bit of my time in engineering or data actually just recruiting and constantly stalking talent that's out there. And it's not, and again, Fortune 100 companies fall into a deeper rut when it comes to attracting talent, because they think, gee, if I just ask a recruiter or a recruiting agency, I can acquire all this talent, or if I just align to a large university, I'll get the talent I need. It's actually about embracing the broader data community. So, do you have someone or your first person who is an active member of Kaggle or any online data community, or someone who lives and breathes Stack Overflow? And it's by participating in the online digital community to see who is making interesting contributions to open source projects, or is contributing to thought leadership or the general narrative to the digital ecosystem out there. You have to almost take a Moneyball-like strategy to say, gee, I've got this sort of interesting internal sabermetrics algorithm in my head to attract the people I need for my enterprise. If you don't have that hands-on strategy, you're gonna not really attract the best talent. And so, those are the 2 big takeaways for me for talent. It's this idea of creating these self-contained agile pods that are really creative and can embed themselves in a distributed way with the business units, and then being very hands-on and having this Moneyball strategy to attracting talent to feed that ambassador network of change that you're going to create. Back to you.
It's funny because as Ken said, well, how do you go find all this great talent? One of the strategies I've used over the last, I guess it's almost 10 years, when I'm looking for great talent, is to call Ken and ask if he knows anyone great who's looking with this or that skill set. And over the years, it seems like he's kept his eye open for great talent that's looking to make a move, and almost always can connect me with someone fantastic. But I actually think that there's a nugget of really useful insight there. Which is that I think one of the smart things that Ken does, and I've taken this approach as well myself, is to think about talent strategy over the course of your career, if you're a data leader, as a long-term game, not a short-term one, right? And so I have built relationships and thought about, and been involved in not only the data community, but also some of the women in tech communities and other kinds of communities that help connect you to diverse sources of talent. And when I've done outreach, or participated in events or conferences for some of these organizations or mentored people, it's not with the short-term objective of I'm trying to hire a director of analytics and I need to find that person tomorrow, or I'm looking to hire a VP of data science and I want to hire that person tomorrow. Although, of course, I have needed to hire those people tomorrow. It's more with the long-term goal of building relationships and building a network of very talented, diverse people from all over the world, who are smart and very capable and across many different dimensions, that I hope to work with at some point. And it doesn't have to be in this role tomorrow. It could be in a different role 10 years from now. There are people that I've met and interviewed for jobs, to join my team, where at the time it didn't work out for whatever reason. They weren't quite the right fit for us at the time, or we weren't quite the right fit for the person at the time. But I've ended up hiring them later in a different company, or into a different role, or referred them for another job. And so, and ended up connecting them with a different great opportunity. And other people like Ken have done the same for me, connecting me with great talent. And so I think the companies and the people that are, people talk about winning the talent war. If there is such a thing as winning the talent war, I think the folks that are certainly doing the best in this very competitive environment for talent are people who are taking a long-term view. They're building long-term relationships with smart people all over the world. They're building long-term relationships with diverse sets and groups of people in different kinds of organizations. And they're maintaining those relationships over time with no expectation of an immediate payoff. And those are the folks that are ultimately building the best and most talented teams. And I think we would probably all agree that having top talent is mission critical to data transformation, whether that's top engineering talent, data analytics, business analytics, data science, machine learning, AI. You can't succeed without really great talent. And the other thing I would say is when I look for what great talent is, I found over the years, after interviewing thousands and thousands of people for different jobs, that technical acumen is really simply a prerequisite for the rest of the interview. Like, that's table stakes. Of course, you want someone who's immensely technically talented. But I found what really seems to set people apart is actually the combination of technical talent with an understanding of the business and the business problems they're trying to solve, and the ability to communicate the outcome and the impact of their work to non-technical stakeholders. And even for very junior roles, a very junior data engineer or an entry-level business analyst, or an entry-level data scientist, I hold every person I hire to that standard of being able to have some business acumen and some ability to do that data storytelling, as Ken said, that sort of communication, data communication skills. And the reason for that is because although I certainly subscribe to and have benefited from Ken's pod model in many prior organizations, I think to be successful today as a data scientist or as an engineer, you need to have at least a rudimentary understanding of the business problems you're solving, and at least a little bit of an ability to communicate why your solution is the right one. And that doesn't necessarily mean you put the most junior data scientist in front of the CEO to have that conversation, but they ought to be capable of doing so, even if you don't actually put them into that situation. And I found that by hiring people who have that combination of the technical skills with the business acumen and communication skills, and the ability to work in teams, you want folks who also have that ability to be collaborative, because very few interesting problems at work can get solved by yourself. That kind of holistic set of skills seems to make for the best teams that are able to deliver the best results, at least in my previous experience. So shifting gears a little bit, we've had a few questions come in about technology itself. Obviously, these days, the data landscape is very rich, broad, and deep with all sorts of different amazing technologies, back-end infrastructure choices you can make. And I know, Ken, between your different prior roles, you've probably worked with all of them at this point of time. So tell us, what are some of your strategies for how to choose between all of these great sets of technology, and how to think about the interoperability of these as you're making those choices?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that you have to be someone who's in tune with the pulse of what's happening in the latest technology data landscape these days, just because things are moving so fast. And I think a lot of that is accelerated by the open source ecosystem. A few years ago, maybe a few decades ago, everybody was very much, a SAS geek, and that was the predictive modeling tool of choice. But we sort of see now this explosion of open source technologies like Python, R, etc., that are very much democratizing, I think, not just data, but the tools that anybody can use and leverage to create advanced statistical models on essentially rent a supercomputer on anybody's public cloud infrastructure now. I remember watching, and it's a fairly public story of this young lady who in her high school essentially created an algorithm to potentially have a prediction score around a particular kind of cancer. And how did she do that? She basically set up a whole bunch of computational farms on a public cloud, found a bunch of open source statistical libraries, but then her strength was being able to look at all this public data and then fine tune a model around it. And then her model became so successful that universities and research institutions started using it. So, we're sort of like in this golden age of democratization of data and statistics and data science. And technology is an incredible accelerator and democratizing leveling force around that. That said and done, I think that as we move and see this shift from proprietary data science technologies to open source technologies, some of the dimensions that make it important to us are very much still classical things, which is how easily can you, once you've built a model, productionalize it and actually democratize its outcomes into your community. A lot of large Fortune 100 giants have large teams of data scientists, but the problem is their algorithms never reach production. They're just stuck on their laptop and they never see the light of the day and have an impact. So one of the key dimensions I look at and advise folks on is whatever technology you're using, is it a walled garden, or is it something that can be quickly productionalized and connect and provide insights to the other systems that might exist, often proprietary systems in a large institution or organization. So that productionalization and democratization pipeline, that DevOps pipeline is quite important. The second, I think, dimension of it is how well does that technology, how popular is it from a user community perspective, not just within your company, but outside your company. So much of data science and data engineering today is leveraging libraries and packages that are being created just by the community out there, whether it's for visualization, exploration, insight generation. And so the second question I often ask folks is to say, how strong is the community behind this particular technology that you're looking to adopt? And if you can find technologies that are that have a strong adoption both within your company, an organization, and beyond in the open source community, you're probably on the right track. And the third aspect of this is, I think, obviously quite important, particularly if you're a private company, is how secure is it? How well suited is it for privacy and policy management? And I'm happy to say we're seeing now increasingly this emergence of technologies that really help us and make the lives of data scientists who may be playing with data and sensitive data on their laptops or in their private cloud even, ensure that the right controls, the right governance structures, privacy, access control, it's all properly locked down. A lot of times you see that there isn't enough acceleration or adoption because people are just scared of data leakage. And we live in this era of every week you see a leak or a hack that people get worried about, right? And I think one of the great things we're seeing now is this growing ecosystem of startups and technologies that is just enforcing and making that control and security policy management easier as well, right? So to summarize, it's important for the technologies we pick that can be easily put into production so they can have a real business world impact, that there's a strong community around it, both internally and externally. And thirdly, there's probably an ability to control and manage it from a policy management perspective, so that it's trusted. It's a trusted data story. It's not just a data story. And I think those are some of the dimensions that I care most about when we're talking about looking at the language of the ecosystem of technologies out there.
Yeah, that's a great place, I think, to sort of wrap up, because I think it's a really a great overview of some of the important considerations as you're laying that infrastructure foundation for data-driven transformation going forward. So I've really enjoyed the chance. I hope all of you have. It looks like we had a really robust group, asked a lot of great questions. And so I hope you all have enjoyed the chance to hear from Ken, a few stories from myself as well about our journeys of data-driven transformation over the last 15 to 20 years in both of our careers. We've enjoyed the chance to talk with all of you about infrastructure, about data strategy, talent strategy, and the journey that we are all on. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the host and say thank you so much for having myself and Ken. We enjoyed this immensely.
Oh, thank you. Thank you indeed. I want to say on behalf of our symposium, I want to thank you for bringing this very insightful conversation and sharing your experience with us. Also, I would like to thank all those who are in the audience who watched this this session.